Hello and good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us for our webinar this morning, our in-house recruitment webinar. My name is Natasha Priya here over at In-House Recruitment, the fastest growing community for in-house recruiters and HR professionals in the industry. Apologies for the slight delay in getting this webinar up and running. We just wanted to make sure that everyone who had signed up was able to get onto the stream. So before we get started, I'd like to do a little bit of an introduction to who we'll be hearing from today. And today's webinar is in partnership with Hired. For those of you who don't know who they are a career marketplace that intelligently matches tech talent with the world's most innovative companies like you guys. They combine cutting edge tech with unbiased career coaching so that both the talent and the employers can find the right fit a lot faster. They are on a mission to find everyone a job they love. So we will be hearing from Hired shortly. But the title of today's webinar, as I'm sure you're all aware, is The Art of Hiring Top Tech Talent, which is a hugely hot topic in the industry at the moment. So we're delighted to be joined today by Christine from the FT and Libby from Hired, who will be our presenters for the next 30, 40 minutes or so. You will see on the right hand side of the webinar screen that you are able to pop questions in. So as the presentations go on, please do put them into the question box, and at the end of the two presentations we'll be posing those questions to both Christine and Libby. So without further ado, please let me introduce you to our first speaker and presentation for today. We have Christine from FT to get us underway. So over to you, Christine.
Hi everyone. It's Christine. So Christine Young, I work for the FT. I'm actually sat here at the Hired offices as well. So I'm here obviously joined by Libby from Hired, and obviously on the screen you also see Megan as well. But yeah, so give you a bit of background about myself. So I've been working in recruitment for 6 years now. It's one of those situations where recruitment found me. I didn't find recruitment, but I've worked in a multitude of different companies, so ranging from early stage startups all the way down to an agency, and FT is my first, I guess, large corporate company. So today I just really wanted to share with you some insights that I've learned working in a larger company, and hopefully something that you will be able to take away today, specifically around how to improve your tech hiring. So imagine this scenario. A hiring manager comes up to you and they say, I need a backfill for a role and this person is leaving on Thursday. We need to hire as soon as possible. Does this sound like anything in your current role? Because it happens to me pretty much all the time. This is reactive recruitment. So as an in-house talent professional, it's our responsibility to be extremely strategic to the business and do yourself a favor as well, so you can really focus on some of the higher value to the business. And this segues quite perfectly into my next slide. I'll be covering the recruitment funnel and walking you through each stage and its implications. And hopefully, being an in-house professional, you would have seen the recruitment funnel in the past. So the reason why the recruitment funnel is a funnel is because it's an idea that you will start with a large number of candidates from the top end, starting from the job opening, and it eventually decreases as you go down the funnel. So linking back into the scenario I mentioned earlier, when a hiring manager comes to you and they say, right, we've got a job opening, can you post a role online? The view is that you would then get, ideal world anyway, you get 100 applications through, you do your CV screening, you then whittle it down to, let's say, 50%. You then interview maybe another 10% of those, and eventually you hire one of the candidates. I think this is the traditional recruitment functions that I've highlighted here that a lot of people would probably be used to and get exposed to. But from a strategic perspective, we should be thinking about things like employer branding. So instead of looking at a job opening, we should be looking at, from a company basis anyway, what our value proposition is. So if your employer branding is strong, naturally people will want to work for you. You shouldn't really be in a position whereby you have to wait till a job opening and you get, if you're lucky, and this is technology we're talking about, you'd be lucky to even get one role, one application through. Instead of applications as well, we should be thinking about sourcing. So building your talent pool finding relevant candidates that you know will surely get interviewed and surely will, well, your hiring managers would want to hire. Instead of CV screening, we should be looking at and thinking about candidate experience. So there's no drop-offs during the interview process. I'm sure we've all experienced, a really great candidate coming in through the door and for them to drop off because we sent them a technical task throughout the process. So definitely something to think about in terms of how many stages of interviews a candidate should be subjected to. Instead of the interview process as well, we should be thinking about the candidate selection process. So I'm a big fan of having a standardized approach, especially in technical roles, because we don't want people to be able to be prone to bias throughout the screening stages. And separately, we also don't want people to be hiring from gut feeling as well. And trust me, like I've hired with a lot of kind of early stage founders and startups, they would tend to hire someone just based on the fact that, oh, I've been in this industry for 10 years and I think he's a good fit or she is a good fit. We need to make sure that we are well equipped in terms of the competencies that we're assessing for. And as a talent partner, technically our role doesn't actually end when someone's hired as well. We need to best set up our candidates for success, and our roles should end technically when they join and also when they pass probation. So looking back into the recruitment funnel, as per this slide, in an ideal world, you'd want to have a ton of applications. But yeah, as I mentioned earlier, there's a lot of opportunities for us, and I think realistically, we barely even get 0 candidates in for a senior engineer role. So how do we align all of our recruitment initiatives with our brand, our hiring objectives, and most importantly, how do we forward plan as well? So what I'll be talking you through is essentially something that we've done here at the FT, and I'll be specifically focusing on the top end of the funnel, which is employer branding and sourcing. So give you a bit of context in terms of the FT. So we have been around for over 130 years. And the remit I cover specifically with product and technology teams. So we are 400 strong across various disciplines, across engineering, product, designers, business analysts, program managers, you name it, that all kind of falls under my remit. So when I joined the FT last year, my task at hand was to complete a full SWOT analysis with everyone from technical directors all the way down to anyone that's engaged with hiring, which could be principal engineers. And I just really wanted to learn from everyone as much as possible. Like, why did you join the FT? And I think with that data, that helped me really frame the initial kind of value proposition. And you can see on the right here, and I did 3 sessions amongst various disciplines in my second week at the FT. What came up a lot is that FT is a known entity. It's a reputable brand. People know it, but it's still really unknown when it comes to product and technology. Our tech stack is Node.js, some React, AWS, and Python, and all of these tech stacks are pretty much what everyone's looking for as well. So we're competing with exactly the same talent pool as people who would go to your Googles and Facebooks, Amazons of the world, down to like the fun startups like Deliveroo, or the promise of startup life and culture that we might not necessarily be able to provide. On top of that, so the challenge we had was FT's been around for 130 years. Employer branding also falls under a larger remit. So we have a team of cross-functional people across editorial, our comms and brands team, learning and development. And the nature of the topic of what we write about at the FT is mainly around the CEO population. So we've actually done a lot of audience development studies in terms of our readership, but what we have found is a lot of people tend to think our readership are men, bankers in their 40s, and naturally people thought our teams would be the same as well. So what I did was I crafted a hiring recommendation and presented it back to our teams and to Kate, who's our Chief Product and Information Officer. She sits on our board and essentially got her blessing with what we were going to do. And just to kind of show you the challenges that we had, and just to reiterate what I mentioned earlier, our product and technology brand were not visible online. So people go to ft.com to read the paper, not to check out our culture and our values. How do we make our culture and values easily accessible for those who want to find out more about what we do? We also have a ton of great people already speaking at all the best conferences in London. So they do keynotes at like JSConf, QCon. You know, these engineers already have a large following on their Twitter. So how can we make that more visible to people within that industry? And here's a weird fact. If you go to ft.com and you go to work and careers on the top section, it shows you all of the articles around work and careers. So as a candidate, if you wanted to go and find out more about what we do, you had to scroll all the way down into the About Us section, which then takes you into our culture. And then you have to click through another page, which then takes you to our workday. Not great experience in general. So we thought if we can't do anything with our site, then let's look elsewhere. So the first step for us was that we did a due diligence of what our brand looks like in communities where engineers typically go to. Naturally, we started with Stack Overflow. And the weird thing was no one has actually touched our Stack Overflow for like 5 years. So there were pictures on there that was old, completely wrong tech stack, did not reflect our current teams. And it was actually quite horrendous because, you know, diversity and inclusion is one of the core values as to what we do. And there's a picture of just all male team in a hackathon, which was absolutely not reflective of our teams at all. And then we also have GitHub. For those of you who don't know GitHub, essentially it is a web hosting service where people go online and they can share a lot of their open source projects. And we were quite lucky that we open source a lot of our projects as well internally at the FT. So what they did was they built a workaround solution by creating a repository, which you can see right there, which is pinned to our FT account. So if anyone went to the FT account to see what we're up to, you could see our careers README file that's pinned to the page. So it showcases what the work that we do specifically in FT technology. It links to our roles online. And of course, it also gets you to see who your future colleagues are as well. So you can see all the contributors on the top page. And this actually really helps. Since its launch, I think we get a minimum of at least 5 applications inbound per week saying, hey, we've just been looking around your GitHub page. We really like your README. What opportunities do you have for me? So in a way, it has just created a new, lead generation for us, and people that A, are already interested in what we do, and B, it's organic. We didn't really spend too much time on this apart from some engineering time to put the README file together. So if you work for a startup and you're thinking about how to do employer branding on a shoestring, I would really recommend going down this route. So whilst both Stack Overflow and GitHub are great options for us, it still didn't really quite fully solve the challenges we had, specifically around, we wanted somewhere where the teams are proud of showcasing our culture, showcasing what our team does, and showcasing our roles. And we want to activate this and shout about what we do as much as possible. So what we did was, using the product management framework, we framed our problem statements. So the first problem was, we wanted to activate the top specialists in the industry just to apply to us. So we don't want to just attract people who are actively looking in the market. We want to attract the best and the most diverse individuals. And recent stats from Stack Overflow developer survey states that about 13.1 job seekers are actually active, and 62% are passive but open to hearing new opportunities, which is essentially a talent pool that we want to tap into. And the second is, we want to also educate applicants about us, give them an opportunity to understand our culture, our values, our job content, what methods and tooling we use, and what technologies we're using to sway them to come and work with us. So essentially, the site will delve deeper into our different teams and disciplines in order to minimize the need for, say, candidate packs, or having someone to get on the phone and convince a candidate to work for us. Everything is online nowadays as well, and we can't hide with Glassdoor as well. So our recommendation was that if we can't build into ft.com, then let's build around it. So we built a microsite specifically for product and technology teams. And how do we measure success at the back of that? Our hypothesis really was that we're hoping that we'll get more visitors to the site. We'll get more visitors also obviously applying via a careers page, and of course a number of shares from FTers as well. So this was a team that we put together. We didn't really have a budget to commission an external agency to work with us, so we had to, I guess, do a little bit of like blackmailing to get people involved. We bought them pizzas, but this is a kind of approval chain that we had to go through in order to get the microsite launched. We had to get approval from our Chief Product and Information Officer and our CTO as well, and all of our senior leadership organization. We naturally turned to the business as well for volunteers, which is really tricky because everyone had their day job, and this kind of accounted to their personal time, and everyone has like 10% time as well. So we didn't want our engineers to burn out, but we were quite lucky. We had quite a lot of engineers who volunteered to work with us on this. So build officially began in August. We started researching what we wanted it to look like. We got UX input as well and UI input, as you can see from the right. Here's a couple of wireframes. We had loads of debates as to how we want to showcase our culture. You know, what was a URL? We had a lot of fun actually deciding what this looked like. You know, was it craft with like capitalized ft.com? But you know, all in all, I think it was a really interesting experience because what we found as we were building the microsite, we had a lot of pushback from loads of different areas as we went on. Our head of design weren't too happy because our design had to be on brand. We had to get our legal compliance approval as well because it's obviously an extension of the FT website. So were we compliant in terms of what we were trying to achieve? And finally, HR also wanted to see whether the approval process and whether someone applying via the microsite will go via Workday. So all in all, I would say the build actually took about 3 months. But bearing in mind, you know, we all met once a week. This was a kind of 10% project time, and we were extremely lucky to be able to get it launched by end of November. So that's what the site looks like. It lives on ft.com/product and tech. We went live end of November in time for Silicon Milk Roundabout, which is a hiring event in London for tech and engineers. And we were quite lucky, I think, in a sense where it started working right off the bat. And if it started breaking, I think during that weekend, I wasn't quite sure what would have happened. But we started getting a load of inbound emails. So to date, we have about 50 applications for London and Sofia. And historically speaking, we used to get 0 applications for a senior engineering role. And now we get an increase of 300%, which I think for us is a great win. And just to go a little bit more granular as well, we've had 2 roles open since November. One mid-level role where historically speaking, we used to get maybe like 8 applications, and now we get about 17 applicants. So delving a bit deeper, when having a chat with candidates, we tend to find out they go through different sites and before actually applying for a role. So whilst the microsite itself generated inbound as well, everyone also said the microsite also helped them form a view as to what FT tech and product looks like. So I think the key takeaway for us is that, you know, every presence counts. You know, even when you're shopping for something expensive, you don't just look at one place. You look at reviews, you ask your friends for recommendations, you read articles about it. And the same applies as well for employer branding. So yeah, hopefully, you know, this is something that you can kind of bear in mind whilst thinking about what is important for your technology teams. And this segues quite perfectly into my next slide, which is the next part of the recruitment funnel, which goes to sourcing. You know, how do we look for talent online? Because specifically we're talking about engineers and tech talent here, I'll kind of talk about the 4 kind of key tools that we use at the FT. So LinkedIn is obviously the holy grail of everything that we do on a day-to-day basis. But to be honest, I would say we use it quite minimally because even if you kind of speak to one of our engineers, they get about 20 LinkedIn emails. So we predominantly use LinkedIn as more of a market map rather than, you know, reaching out to candidates. We tend to kind of form a good kind of judgment and background about them, get a more informed decision, and then reach out to them. The second tool we'd use is mainly GitHub. So once we find an engineer's GitHub page, we'll do an X-ray search. We try to find other means to get in touch with them, like via emails as well. Again, forming a whole basis from their profiles on LinkedIn. AngelList, I find, works pretty well as well, especially when you work in a startup. It's a bit trickier for us, I think, at the FT, because what we find is most engineers on AngelList want to work for a smaller company, usually for equity as well. But I had success in my previous role hiring from AngelList, and I'd really recommend it. And Hired, they've been an interesting kind of hiring partner for me, because in my first ever role in tech, I was really struggling with the data engineer role. It was really niche, and I was really worried that I wasn't able to find anyone. And luckily, I was able to find my first ever hire from Hired. And since then, I think in a way it's helped me build my confidence. And I've hired a lot of people since in my previous roles, specifically with iOS and Android. So it kind of really helps when you need to hire at a specific and tight time scale. So I guess the key takeaway from my presentation today is really to be personal and build a rapport with your communities. One thing I've learned is, as we're trying to decide how we pitch the FT, is if we're not agile, then don't say you are. That's definitely one thing we really wanted to put on our site, but we realized we weren't actually as agile as the community thinks what agile is. Engineers like to build things and solve problems. So make sure that you build your value proposition around that. But in any case, I hope my case study inspires you to work around what your current company believes our roles and careers pages should look like. If it doesn't work around it. And yeah, I'm really excited to be able to say, this is just the version 1, our MVP. Now getting a team together to build upon it. And we've also just won an award for the Best Team Award. And we've also just heard from a marketing team that we'll actually get our own dedicated section in the ft.com website as well. So we consider that a massive win. So hopefully next time that you see me and if we get to talk, I will probably have better metrics. But that's it from me today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Christian. It's really insightful. And I know you're doing a lot of really good stuff over at FT. So that was just a little bit of a preview to you. I'm now going to hand you over to Libby from Hired, who I think is still in the same room. And apologies for the lorry or fire truck that went off in the background a second ago. The guys over at Hired did mention they might hear some background noise. So apologies if that interrupted for anyone. But over to you, and look forward to your presentation now.
Thanks, Tash. Yes, we are sat on in our office right by Old Street Roundabout, so you might hear a few sirens. It's just to help it kind of feel authentic. So excuse us if that happens. Let me introduce myself. I'm Libby. I've been working at Hired for 2.5 years now. I spent the first 2 years here working with our startups. But more recently, I'm working with the mid-market and enterprise clients, including Christine, actually. So thank you so much for joining that and coming in to our office to do that as well. The other side of my role is I take a lead on our diversity and inclusion initiatives. So I'm going to make a quick kind of personal plug here. If anybody's ever interested in brainstorming how we can all contribute to building a more diverse pool of tech candidates in the UK, I'm always up for a chat on that. So give me a shout if you're into that kind of thing. A little bit about us. Thanks, Tash, for introducing us earlier, but just a little bit about what we do, just to set the context of what I'm going to talk about. We are a platform for hiring top technology talent. Today we'll really talk about engineers, but we also work on product roles, design, data, and so on. We're working globally with everyone from sort of tiny startups to multinational investment banks and consultancies and everything in between. The next thing on my notes says for me to check which of those I can mention, but I haven't done that, so I'm going to stop there on that. But do go and check it out on hired.com/employers, and you'll see some more information there. There's an opportunity to sign up for a quick demo if you want to on there as well, and someone can give you a shout to give you a bit more context on what we do. The way it works is that we screen candidates up front for their skills and for their readiness to interview, meaning we accept about 10% of those who have applied to us. We end up with a really dynamic, active community. And from there, companies reach out directly to candidates through the platform, which means we end up with a ton of data, which is what I'm going to talk about today. Just looking at last year, we had 10,000 companies use the platform and almost 100,000 candidates participate, which gave us nearly 200,000 interview processes to look into. Where Christine's super hands-on with her brand and all of that sort of stuff, I'm going to go more from a data point of view and share some of what we've learned from candidates' decision-making processes. And that's all the way from kind of introduction to hire and any of the rejection reasons or things like that in between. We just released last week our first report on the state of software engineers. Now, this dives into sort of motivations for engineers and trends that we're seeing in the market. So what I want to talk about today is some of the actionable takeaways that we can use for those of you looking to hire tech talent. We'll start with understanding the candidate, that's your sort of core customer, your core audience, and then talk about how we can optimize the interview process and move on to kind of how we can best put across the offer and start the retention from the very beginning. So, understanding the candidate. Let's start with where candidates are learning to code. Actually, we found that the 3 or 4 year computer science degree isn't quite as common as you might think. While half of the candidates we surveyed did do a typical CSM degree, 1 in 5 are actually identified as self-taught, and the growing number are looking at bootcamp. So I guess from the self-taught point of view, that's really important. I think maybe what we're seeing here is don't discount those people. In terms of more anecdotally, we actually see some of the best results in our tech tests and the work that we have submitted from candidates who are self-taught. On top of that, it kind of shows a tenacity and an appetite for independent learning, hard work, and all that sort of stuff. As well as from an inclusion point of view, it means that it helps you to include people who maybe can't afford university or don't have the time or the means or a boot camp. So definitely don't discount them. It's going to help you reach some really interesting talent. Some companies are going as far as removing education from CVs. I know a few of you that I've seen log on to the webinar are already doing that, so that won't be news to you. But just to be aware that some companies are doing that, and actually, I think in government departments, they're also going completely CV blind. On the bootcamp side, more and more people are doing this. So this is last year's number, 13% have participated in a bootcamp. But actually that number's going up, especially in London. So we're seeing some really strong talent come out of coding schools like Makers, GA, also things like Ada's College, which actually Christine told me about in the first place. So thanks for that. I definitely want to keep an eye on. Diving into bootcamps a little bit here, 76% of candidates, so about 3/4, said that it was helpful in preparing to get an engineering job. I mean, we'd hope so. So I don't think that's really what to focus on here. But what is really interesting is that when we asked hiring managers if they would be prepared to hire a fresh bootcamp grad, only 7% said they wouldn't. So we're actually seeing a majority of hiring managers say, yes, we would absolutely consider that person. And then the remainder are saying, not sure, it would depend on the situation and the role. So take that to your hiring managers and see if this is something they're open to. And then if not, maybe it's time to start asking questions on why, or perhaps taking a small sample size and saying, let's try out a few people for a particular role or for a particular, for a couple of weeks and just see how those people get on. Might be time to sort of change that, that mindset, particularly given 3 or 4 year coding degrees. Some of them could now be a little bit outdated, so just want to keep an eye on. Let's talk about the top programming languages. We know, all of you, I imagine, on this line know how competitive it is out there to hire the top engineers, so we need to be mindful of what developers actually want to learn. Our research has shown that Python and JavaScript are coming out on top. They're definite favourites, while PHP is not very popular. It's come out 19%, said it was their most hated, unfortunately. And then Java, well, Java's loved and hated. So take from that what you will. I guess what I'm taking from it is that we certainly can't pigeonhole engineers and that we need to think about these people as individuals. So the way you can use this in your attracting candidates, I suppose, is if you have a candidate, for example, who's mentioned an interest in learning Python, or maybe it's React or Angular, but your role doesn't necessarily focus on that, then mention the opportunities for personal development early, almost in that first message. Be saying that if you have hackathons or if you have buddying up schemes where they could join someone who actually does specialize in that language, or if it's something that comes later in the career progression, perhaps there's a project that you know about or a migration, bring that up really early, because candidates will generally indicate when they've got an idea of what they want to learn in the future. So talk about the role that they're going to be doing, but also what they can develop themselves on the side. So let's talk about the interview process. This I found super interesting because people always ask us at Hired kind of what the trends are in terms of interview process, what other people are doing and what we're moving away from. Far and away, the most stressful time for engineers is the coding test, followed closely by whiteboarding sessions. Not entirely surprising. What did surprise me was that only 1 in 5 people found the behavioural kind of on-site interviews to be very stressful or quite stressful. So really that's becoming quite, a lot of candidates indicate that was a part of the process that they actually really enjoy, maybe because that's further down the process typically. But we need to talk about coding tests. This is another question I get all the time. Tech and talent leaders want to know about what other people are doing and what the trends are here. What we saw is that nearly 2/3 of candidates found that coding tests were pretty much irrelevant to their day job. And actually only half are seeing it as an effective way to test someone's aptitude for coding. Actually, as Christine mentioned, if you add that to the drop-off in your process that you get just because of the time commitment, it starts to become a problem. This is where we're losing candidates. I say it time and time again with everyone from small startups to multinational companies. What I can say is that the people who are doing the best at this, the companies who are doing the best, are those who are able to offer options. We've seen a real trend here towards companies offering 3 options at this point. So the first would be, here's a test for you to do at home. The second would be, come in and do a technical interview or pair programming, whiteboarding, whatever it might be. And finally, there's an option to submit some work or a project that they've worked on. You may need to do some verification as you typically would at that point if they submit work, but it shouldn't be a problem. The main thing there as well is that it really helps from an inclusion point of view. If you think about how in demand these technology candidates are, and they're getting 4 or 5 tech tests to do, actually some people just don't have the time to put 3 hours aside per tech test, and you're going to lose out on those people, maybe parents or people in full-time study, or actually maybe people who work for a company where the culture is that they have to work extremely long hours. So if you offer options there, you're going to get more reach and ultimately better and more diverse candidates. The final part I wanted to talk about is offer and retain. So how do we get that offer to sound really great, but also to start setting them up for a great career and to thrive at that company? So we've talked about last year's trends, but actually in your roles, you need to be ahead of next year's. I know that might sound like an impossible challenge, but let me give you an idea of some things that we're seeing from a sort of forward-looking point of view. So machine learning's come out on top, which isn't entirely surprising. Machine learning, user experience, and blockchain are the top 3 skills that candidates are interested in learning about. Now, this doesn't have to be a full-time job. Again, it goes back to the point of if you have an opportunity, if you have time that engineers can devote to personal projects or buddy systems or hackathons or anything like that, bring that in at this offer point as well, and use it to get people excited. And not everyone can offer those, so if you can, really leverage that. And ask them as well, ask what they're most interested in learning and try and find a way for that to be part of their day-to-day working life, if not particularly their job. Again, in terms of securing people, half of our candidates said that pair programming, if a company did pair programming, it would increase their interest in that company. That's huge. Like, it doesn't have to be all the time, but share this with your hiring managers. And if you're not doing it already, mention this and say, perhaps this is leveling out on people. Would you be open to trying this? So finally, and I'm going to conclude here, but let's look at this 10-year goal slide to remember that the people we're working with are individuals. They've all got individual personal goals. It's not one size fits all. And where 8% of those people who are coming through the doors are just looking to have a comfortable retirement, there's also a fifth who are aspiring entrepreneurs and a quarter who are looking to be future leaders. And then the biggest part, 37%, just want to build some really cool stuff. So with that, I'm going to say thank you, and do head over to Hired if you want to hear any more. We'll definitely be up for giving you a call to tell you more about the platform. If you're hiring in technology, that's data, engineering, product and design, and someone friendly from this team will give you a shout and tell you a bit more.
And thank you very much, Libby, and love a little bit of data on a Wednesday morning. So really insightful, and I know that was primarily from sort of global and UK based data as well. So as I think you guys just mentioned just then, you will be sending the full report out post event along with the slides, etc. But we do have a couple of questions. Christine, I'm going to pop one over to you, which came through pretty quickly. Does gut feeling matter when you have a choice in tech talent? And granted, there's not often a choice, but is that important, do you think?
I mean, I have a lot of debates about this with my hiring manager. So in one of my previous roles, my CTO, is very keen on hiring people with computer science backgrounds. They have to, have an understanding as to what they're doing. I think it really depends on what you're building. So, currently at the FT, we're building websites, we're building apps, and I think, we're able to hire people in order to train them up as well. But if you're building, say, like a highly distributed, scalable systems, and you're in a bank, and you're hiring from gut feeling, I think there might be a bigger problem in that instance. I really do believe in, being in a situation where hiring managers are armed with competencies. So even if it's just something like, having good code practices, or knowing how to pair program, etc. So having like little areas like that, and then having the soft skills. It's important, I think, as you go into an interview, you can kind of pick, you can at least select out of a scale between like 1 to 5, 5 being, strong hire, and you can come out of it and have a discussion. I think that's much healthier than having a team of hiring panel coming out of interview going, yeah, I'm not sure, based on my 10 years experience, I don't think that person's a fit. But I'm like, but why? We want to be in a position where we can give constructive feedback as well. So that's why I'm such a big advocate into having a scoring standardized system.
And I think as well, you also have to be careful of unconscious bias and everything else as well, which obviously leads into a diversity piece. So just staying with you, Christine, what's been the biggest employer branding challenge that you faced over the course of the projects that you were working on?
Yeah, I would definitely say it's getting buy-in from all the different stakeholders. So I think there's this book called Be More Pirate that was actually shared within our team, and we were like, yeah, we're the pirates amongst FT, because we were kind of forging the path and saying, let's build this microsite. But I think the amount of times we had emails from various teams across the business saying, what are you doing? Why are you doing this? And just having to explain to them why we're doing this, literally, I think is what took the most time. So I think the biggest challenge was getting buy-in from marketing and comms and legal and even HR as well. But I think eventually, hopefully we won everyone over now once they've kind of seen the output. But you could imagine, we were borrowing engineers' time, designers' time off their projects. Like people just didn't quite know what we were building at the time. So I would say that's the biggest challenge, is getting buy-in from different teams. And I say that because we're a larger company, but even when I've worked in smaller companies as well, I find most of the clashes that would usually arise is between talent and usually from marketing or from comms. It's just, obviously from a marketing perspective, you want to sell a product based on, what the customers are, but our customers from a talent team is candidates. So it's trying to find that balance, and that's what I find the biggest challenge is.
Yeah, definitely. And I think stakeholder engagement is an issue that probably the majority of our audience right now are aware of and appreciate as well. So a question for you, Libby. How can companies that are hiring for that competitive top sort of tech stacks, how can they stand out from their competitors?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I guess some of what Christine said really speaks to this as well, like that branding, that microsite, like finding a space that speaks directly to your technology talent. They're actually not going to be excited by a corporate HR page, believe it or not. When we look at the data that we of how candidates are interacting with company profiles on Hired, we're seeing that far and away the most effective way to get candidates to engage with you is actually video content. So from that point of view, we think it just helps candidates to imagine themselves as part of your team. You can really get your story across. So if you can manage to persuade your company to invest in that, it shouldn't be too costly, or perhaps someone in your business can do it themselves. I definitely recommend that. Alternatively, I guess events and building a continuous conversation with your community is always going to be a great way. I know you do a ton of that, Christine, especially from a sort of grassroots level.
Yeah.
Again, like that can help you on the inclusion side if you have a continuous conversation with people and you're part of their development before they've even joined you.
Excellent. And another one, which I know you touched on slightly, Libby, is the retention of top talent to competitors, which is a big question in itself. But how can you improve that retention piece? Now, actually, this could be a question to the two of you, both Libby and Christine.
Yeah, it's a tough one because we know that we see in some of the top technology companies, actually retention isn't that strong even in the best company, even in the most reputable companies that you might expect. So I guess from my side, it's maybe it's acknowledging that people aren't there to stay forever. Technology is going to move on. They're often working project-based. And it's maybe coming to a sort of agreement with each other that while you're here, you're going to be paid X, but we're also going to develop you in X, Y, and Z. And just remember that this is very much a candidate-driven market. And if they've got offers on their plate, kind of every day of the week. So on the retention side, I would say it's very much more about the development than this kind of soft culture, like beanbags, ping pong. I'm literally looking in our hired office now, and we've got a ping pong table that has been collecting dust for about a year and a half. And I imagine we're not the only people like that. What people are interested in is learning and development, I would say.
Yeah. I think linking on to that as well, I think there's a number that says the average of when an engineer stays on a job is about 18 months, I believe. So usually about the 1 year mark, they are pretty much open to hearing about opportunities. I think, we're quite lucky at the FT that, we're quite big in terms of tech. So we have teams focused on like customer products. So it's more like client side. We have teams focused on internal products. So they're a bit more, like they can hack a lot more products. We've got a cybersecurity team, an operations team. So if we have like very open conversations with the team to say like, look, if you want exposure to different areas, you can go and boot camp in different areas. So I think the stat of our internal moves are about 20%. But this is across the FD in general. So we have people from like our B2B teams who's now a product manager. We now have someone from a marketing team who was learning how to code in her own time, and she's now an engineer in our internal products team. So I think we like to welcome like internal transfers, but bearing in mind we are a bigger company. I think if you are a smaller company, something I've noticed is definitely giving them like 10% time, giving them an opportunity to grow outside of their current role. So, if they're interested in, say, learning Python in their own time, like encourage them and give them opportunities where they can exercise that would definitely help.
Excellent. A good question that we've had come through. So what would you say are the 3 to 5 top things that software engineers are looking for with a new employer? And that probably is best placed to you, Libby, based on the research and the conversations that you have with candidates. So 3 top things they're looking for in a new employer.
Yeah, so we've done some research into this as well, which I think it's the brand health report if you wanted to read more about this, about a few months ago. But for what I remember, we looked at the biggest drivers for why candidates would engage with the company, and forgive me if I get any of these wrong, but I remember the top one was compensation, and I would be cautious of reading into that too much. There were about 50% of candidates who said that was their top driver, but I would be cautious of reading into that too much, because I guess the point there is that everybody cares about compensation. So what was interesting actually is the factors below that. So the next top ones, because they're almost what splits people. So from that point of view, I think the next few were culture, technology they're going to work on, and then learning and development. We also knew that people were, particularly in London, and I'm not sure why, but in London, candidates were unlikely to work for a company if they couldn't get on board with the product. Whereas in some places in the US, actually, they're just as interested in doing the tech and kind of not as driven by what the end product's actually used for. But here in London, we're quite mission driven and quite product driven.
Perfect, thank you. So a big question again for Christine. What are you guys doing within talent acquisition at FT for improving diversity and inclusion?
Well, that's a very broad question. So, so our current stat, I mean, when I joined last year, it was 34% female. We're now 36% as of last year. So obviously having a team on board, it kind of helps with things like, doing some direct sourcing. We've also done a lot more events, and I think Libby mentioned earlier, on a more grassroots level. I think there's nothing worse than companies having a knee-jerk reaction, like, oh my God, let's host a woman in tech event. Like that's not how it's done at all. We're quite fortunate that we have a tech director that we hired last year from GDS. Her name's Anna Shipman. We also have 2 principal engineers. And it's also their stories that help as well, because we also offer flexible working. So they work from home 2 days a week. They get to leave earlier to pick up their children. So leveraging those stories that they have, I think it's really authentic. So we get to host events like Node Girls, and we reached out to them, and they're actually super selective who they get to work with, because again, they also know that companies, just want to host an event just for the sake of it. So we're very lucky and fortunate to have those, I think, stories internally. So yeah, we hosted things like Node Girls. I think 90 people showed up that weekend. It was an amazing mix of BAME and people from various industries and backgrounds. We also had a mother bring her child in as well. So that was really nice. It was actually a first learning experience for me, because I didn't expect a kid to show up to a hackathon. So that was great. Second things that we're also doing is also being more present, I think, in different communities. So Lead Dev Conference, I think Hired sponsored them as well last year, but we were the diversity and inclusion sponsor. So it was a lot more, it wasn't just saying like, okay, we're sponsoring an event. We were actually sponsoring underrepresented groups who were unable to pay for a ticket to come to the event. And we actually sent a few of our engineers to go to the event, pick up these candidates, I wouldn't say candidates, but people who managed to secure a ticket, and walk them through, show them what going to a conference is about, because they may have never been to a conference, and eventually just kind of building that relationship. So I think thinking a lot more strategically around how to increase diversity really helps. And I guess the final thing we also thinking about this year is more than just gender. It's also around neurodiversity as well. So as you know, especially with engineers, a lot of people who might be kind of on the kind of autism spectrum as well. So, recognizing these factors, things like in an interview, they might not be looking at you in the eye, they might be tying their shoelace all over and over again, recognizing that that's not a personality thing. It's more of the fact that they're kind of nervous in that interview and know how to recognize those patterns. So yeah, I think there are a lot of things we're trying to do internally to look into that. So.
Yeah, neurodiversity is a huge one at the moment. It's popping up all over my time feed. So the very last question that we've probably got time for today is aimed at Libby. And what are you seeing as the biggest challenge facing recruitment industry in London currently?
Oh, it's such a good question. I think from what I hear, talking to heads of talent and heads of talent acquisition, it's sometimes, and actually a bit of what Christine's just said in terms of the buy-in she had to get across the business, it's sometimes getting your business to recognise talent acquisition as priority number one. So we're always told, I hear from people that they always have they're always told the most important thing to do this year is to hire these people to deliver on this goal. And then it somehow gets lost sometimes in the sort of middle management or in between. And they struggle sometimes to get buy-in from their hiring managers or whatever it is to actually deliver on giving them the time and the respect that actually this function deserves. We should be putting talent acquisition teams kind of on a pedestal, and we've got really smart people there delivering on the top priorities for the business. So I would say sometimes it's about getting buy-in internally, and what you can do there maybe to increase your sort of help that along is use some of this data, or there's a ton of data out there, not just sort of our reports, but use this data to push back on hiring managers and show that actually you know what their competitors are doing and who they're competing for talent with, almost even more than they do. So I'd say from what I'm hearing, the biggest challenge is often getting the respect and buy-in that talent acquisition is deserving of.
Perfect. Unfortunately, guys, that is now all we have time for. So thank you everyone for all of your questions. And if we didn't get a chance to ask, the question that you posed. We will pass all of these over to the hired team and Christine as well, so we can get those answered for you. I'd like to extend a huge thank you to both Christine and Libby for being a part of this webinar. We covered some really insightful and important points and have introduced the audience some new ideas and resolutions to some of those challenges, which I hope you have all found useful. To you guys, if you'd like any more information about any of today's discussions, then please do speak directly to the hired team. We will be following up post-event with both the recording of this webinar so you can have a quick review, the State of Software Developers, Software Engineers report, and also some other bits and pieces as well. So do keep an eye out for our emails. Thank you very much, everyone. I hope you've enjoyed this session, and we hope to see you at another one soon. Have a good day, guys.